Flight sim was hard until I started making YouTube videos about it for a living. Which, you know, that's probably a bit unfair because most of you have an actual job and a life and a wife who doesn't phone the marriage counsellor in advance. But I had a couple of people reach out to me in the last couple of weeks basically saying that the sim was kicking them in the teeth. They'd spent a ton of cash, put in the hours, and it still just wasn't clicking. And when I actually tried to help them, I sort of fluffed it. So I actually sat with that question for a bit. Flight sim was hard until, well, this stuff. Flight sim was hard until I actually tried to stop owning every single airport on the planet. And I genuinely mean that. In fact, I actually went through my community folder the other day and I have 178 different airports. 178. Which, if I'm being completely honest with you, I cannot pretend that I actually fly into half of these as regularly and as often as I probably should. I really don't. Take, for example, Ingebuild Svalbard. I bought it in what, I'd say probably October last year. It's a genuinely great airport, don't get me wrong. Fat vibe, especially with all of the winter ops that you could possibly want. But 8 months since, and I have genuinely flown into it once. $11.99 including VAT for one landing. Yeah, the maths isn't looking that great on that one. And the worst bit, the actual worst bit, when I bought it, I actually kind of knew that. I knew that there were probably 4 or 5 different real world flights that I could choose from with the aircraft that I own right now. Mrs. Fuller has legitimately, at this point in our relationship, stopped reading any of the credit card notifications that pop up on her phone right now. Which is, you know, one way to handle that problem, I suppose. And just do me a favour, open up your community folder or your add-on linker and just look. Scroll through it. Think about which of these airports actually come up a lot in your rotations of the flights that you really fancy doing all of the time in the last 6 months. For me, that's probably your Heathrows, that's Gatwick, Munich, Dubai, Doha, JFK, Hong Kong, and every now and then, sure, I might fly into smaller airports like Rome, the odd Athens flight if I'm feeling particularly Greeky and summery, but that's the list mainly, out of 178 different airports. I'm not saying don't ever buy a Svalbard, or a Dallas, or a Stuttgart. Sometimes you absolutely should, but the test before I click buy now is, can I name at least 5 or more flights that I would genuinely fly here in the next month? Consistently. Not could I fly, would I fly? And if I can't, the airport stays in the basket for a bit and I just move on, which is honestly its own kind of conversation. Flight sim was hard until I worked out what was actually worth paying for, sort of building off of the last one. But yeah, look, I get that you've probably spent quite a lot of cash by now. You've got a stack of airports and aircraft and you're sat there going, right, well, what about, say, Navigraph? What about GSX, Rex Atmos, Say Intentions or Beyond ATC, Chaseplane? Which of these am I actually paying for and which of these am I paying for? There's a difference. And 2 of these are non-negotiable in my opinion. Navigraph is the first and GSX is the second. Navigraph Unlimited costs €81.64 or roughly £70.58 a year, but you have to remember that this isn't just about charts. You get SimBrief in there too, which according to the Navigraph 2026 survey, roughly 75.3% of you actually use. 3 out of 4 of you that are watching this video right now have got access to SimBrief. And on top of that, 74.1% of you are also using Navigraph charts. So when you look at the subscription bills and you feel this deep sense of depression, which I also do, £71 for one product over a year, what you get in fairness is access to 2 of the most well-used tools in this community right now. And of course GSX is the other one. And I appreciate that GSX is a buggy mess at the best of times. It really is. And what you get when GSX is humming along and doing what it should be doing is a very different sim. Motortox, for example, these cool little electric pushback tugs that are remote controlled. It is, simply put, a monster of an immersion, and there's no other way of putting it. There's also Chaseplane 2, £27 for an entirely new MSFS camera system. And I personally think that cinematics mode alone is worth the £27. It's physics based. It puts you on top of any of the 3.5 thousand real world control towers with one click. It talks to GSX, so when the ground crew turns up, the camera knows where to point. And it works with absolutely everything. £27, genuinely look it up. but of course there are add-ons that don't necessarily fit in that essential bracket. For example, take Rex Atmos. It's a brilliant product. I genuinely rate it because of the lack of atmospherics in MSFS 24. But that is subjective. What I deem as something that brings a new dimension to the sim might not be what you think brings something new to the sim. Flight Sim was hard until I worked out what was actually worth paying for. What's worth it to me might be completely worthless to you, and that works both ways. All I would say is, before you click buy on the next big thing or the next add-on that's being hyped up in the community or here on YouTube, sit with it just for a second, look past the trailer, look past the hype. The only real question is whether you genuinely get value out of it. Flight Sim was hard until I picked one aircraft and stayed with it. I want to tell you a bit of a story before I get into the actual nitty gritty of this part, because the story itself is the useful bit. When I started Flight Sim, I bought what probably most of you also bought, and that was the Phoenix A320. My first serious high fidelity aircraft. That was it, just the Phoenix. And for about 3 to 4 months, that was all that I flew, again and again and again. The cold and dark, the FMC, using them do properly, the sequence of switches you should press and in what particular order, when to use specific functionality in the aircraft and how. There was a time where I legitimately felt like I was actually getting good at this. But after a while, my eyes drifted to the PMDG 737. Then the PMDG 777 dropped and I got that. Then the Unibuild A350, the MD-11 for MSFS 24. You can see where this is going. After all of that, the period where I was the best version of myself in the sim was still those 3 to 4 months when I had first started, when I flew just the Phoenix. And if you don't believe me, load up your Volanta right now. Click here on the leaderboard, click aircraft, sort by lifetime and flight time, and you can see that the A320 has over 5 million flight time hours logged. The 737-800 has 3.4 million hours logged. And if you sort it by flight count here, you will see that the A320 has 2.8 million flights logged. And if we go back to the Navigraph survey data for 2026, the Phoenix A319, the 320 and the 321 family sits at 42.4% as the most popular aircraft used in MSFS among the respondents. The PMDG 737 family at 31.5%. The 777 family at 23.3%. You get the point. So if you're ever going to sit there and wonder whether you're allowed or should just fly the same aircraft, you absolutely can. The whole sport is doing it. Whatever that aircraft is for you, that could be the A350, the 737, the Cub, the C172, the King Air, just run with it. Go deeper on it. Don't buy the next one yet. A jack of all trades is a master of none. Oh, and while we're here, by the way, if you are early into the sim and you're still flying default aircraft, Microsoft actually publishes free official manuals for every one of their aircraft, whether that's the A320, a default Cessna, or the Saab B17A. I'll leave a link in the description for you, so go check that out if you need it. Flight Sim was hard until I stopped flying how I thought I was supposed to. So somewhere along the line, somewhere in the community or in the comments section of a video like this one, there's the idea that lives in the air that there is this right way to fly in the sim. You should be on VATSIM. You should only fly real world routes. You should only fly with real weather enabled at real time. You should know your charts back to front. That AI ATC is for casuals and not real simmers. And it's, you know, not true. Of course, VATSIM is still the single biggest player in this space, and I need to be clear about that. But that lead is shrinking year by year as more and more options enter the space. For example, in 2024, VATSIM had an 88.7% share of the vote. By 2025, it was 42.4%, and now in 2026, it sits at 40.1%. Now, in fairness, the drop from 88 to 42 isn't the whole story. It could be a more loyal consumer base that participated more in the 2024 survey, but gradually fizzled out today. As we all know, data doesn't always show the whole story, but there is a trend there. I appreciate that there's a lot more nuance to this, and VATSIM is still the biggest single network, and it is still less than half of the hobby. But when you combine Beyond ATC and Say Intentions, AI ATC tools sit at over 42%. I use say intentions myself, and honestly the reason that I do is because I cannot afford to dictate my full attention to one thing for 2 or 3 or 4 hours straight. I have 5 kids running around the house. Alfie has decided that he's going to completely rip up the living room to build up a fort.
I'm not going to lie. I despise children. There, I've said it.
The dog will, decide that something that was previously not his toy is now his toy. A flight in this house is just not a clean 2-hour block of focused time. It's a series of interruptions with some flight sim happening in between. And I come to Flight Sim to kind of escape all of that, not to add another layer of being told off like I'm some naughty school kid in front of strangers because I had to step away from my desk for like 2 minutes. Really, it is your sim, it is your experience, you are the one that's paying for it. So fly the routes that you actually want to fly, use the tools that fit your actual experience, have fun with it. Flight Sim was hard until I stopped trying to fly the way that others expected me to, and the moment that I stopped, it just got fun again. Flight Sim was hard until I stopped chasing greasers. Anyone who's been in Flight Sim will know exactly what I'm talking about here. You probably spend the entire descent locked onto your FMC. Your speed is fine, the localizer is captured and the glide slope, and you're sitting there saying to yourself, this is going to be the one, this is going to be a butter. And then you flare and you hold it slightly too long and you grease it at minus 150 feet per minute and you screenshot your Volanta. But what you don't account for is that you touched down around 800 feet past the aiming point, off the centerline by a wing's width, nowhere near the touchdown zone, and you probably used around 70% of the runway because you were too busy focusing on feet per minute. For some reason though, the community has become completely obsessed with that one metric. A 100 feet per minute is a greaser. Post it everywhere. The Discords and the Reddit want to see it. But the FAA itself defines a safe landing as a stabilized approach that allows the aircraft to land within the first 1/3 of the runway, under control, at the correct speed, and brought to a complete stop within the designated landing distance. The aiming point is the aiming point for an exact reason. And this is where Volanta or Elvatex comes in. If you haven't already used it, you probably should, because it at least gives you important metrics. When you go to the statistics tab, you can see your landing rate, your landing G-force, and also you will then be able to check whether or not you've deviated from the center line by going into the satellite mode. You can also see where you actually touched down as well. You can also give a new mod I found called Touchdown FX a go if you want to as well, which logs every landing out of a 100 score, I think it is, and it uses 6 similar weighted factors. And look, I'm not an anti-greaser. You get no better feeling when you butter the landing and it's also in the touchdown zone and you're on the center line and you flared it at the right moment. There is literally no better feeling. And trust me, I'm not sitting here saying that I fully cracked this either, because I'm far from that. In fact, my landings are probably about as consistent as a Ryanair landing. But the data being there, the wider data, the bit past the headline number, it just helps. It tells you what was actually going on, even when you would rather not know. And that is what is going to improve your consistency. Flight Sim was hard until I stopped trusting graphics tutorials. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about here. You've probably watched them yourself. I've watched them. The classic 8-minute YouTube tutorial where someone slaps the dev mode FPS counter in the corner of his screen and then tells you that this one setting has saved his entire sim and completely changed his life. Right. Now notice how that 75% of them never actually give you any data to go on. Most of them will go on about dropping this setting to medium and then going into the user config file in your data roaming folder and then changing this value and that value and this value. And then they'll act surprised in the comments when you mention how it doesn't help your sim whatsoever. So yeah, small disclaimer before I get to anything else here. The biggest favour that I have ever done was slowing down with any of that. If your sim is stuttering or you have constant VRAM warnings popping up, the worst thing that you can ever do is open up 12 different tutorials or videos and try to follow all of them at once. Pick one setting, change it one step at a time, go fly, and then see what actually happens. Then you can move on. Because if you change everything at once and the sim runs better, how do you actually know what's fixed it? Anyway, one weekend a few months ago, I did this myself. I sat down, I loaded the sim, I removed as many variables as I could, and went through every single graphics setting in the menu one by one. And yes, it was a genuinely brilliant Saturday evening. But actually, I learned through doing all of this that the single biggest VRAM hog in the entire menu was, lo and behold, texture resolution. In fact, at Ultra, texture resolution was using roughly 17% more VRAM than it was at medium, which worked out at around 2 GB extra from one slider. And as you can see right now, that comes at no cost to visual quality. Like literally nothing. If you're getting VRAM warnings, before you go and panic buy a 5090 or sit there editing a config XML file that you've never seen in your entire life, just go to the graphics menu, drop texture resolution down, and just fly your sim. You might find that that problem kind of just goes away. It did for me anyway. Flight Sim was hard until I stopped believing developer promises. I appreciate that this is probably going to upset some of you watching this video right now, and I will say up front that I am not in any way, shape or form anti-developer. There are small teams who work incredibly hard on complex aircraft, and I appreciate that 9 times out of 10, nobody is sitting there at home going,
right, who can we piss off today?
But the amount of times that I have sat there on the day a developer has actually promised something, refreshing the INI manager or the Contrail app or the sales page like an absolutely sane individual, and just nothing. Crickets. The Bluebird 757 is the obvious one. I think it was originally aimed for late 2024, then it was pushed back to 2025, then 2026, and now it's sitting in stage 2 of a 3-stage beta with a target of Q3 2026, which is around about now. And to be fair to them, they did say back in 2024 that they were, quote, not going to make another release date prediction, which at the time I completely got. But then they made another one anyway, before GTA 6, which has itself now been delayed. Great. The Synaptic A220 is another, announced over 4 years ago and originally targeted for a Q4 2025 release. And we are, entering final testing, while instead posting endless screenshots to stay somewhat relevant. Good one. Or what about the ATR update? AAU4 announced back at FS Weekend in March that it would be packaged up and shipped alongside Sim Update 5 at the end of April. An SU5 released and no ATR. A standalone release was then promised for the 5th of May. The Fokker FB2 made it out the door, but the Antonov, the ATR and the S55, none of them actually were anywhere to be seen. As soon as they're ready is all that we really have, which is, words. Flight Sim was hard until I learned to be cautiously optimistic, or skeptical if you will. Whether that's the Vector 787 or the Rhodium Code A350, whatever, I am genuinely rooting for them, but until I see something solid or a date that actually they can hold, I'm not going to be getting my hopes up about anything because it's just way easier that way. Wait until it's actually out. Read the day 3 bug reports. Don't pay to be an early access beta testing for them for free. Yes, I completely get that you might miss out on the launch buzz, but the buzz is barely worth the buy anyway. Anyway, hopefully this makes Microsoft Flight Simulator a little bit easier for you, and I'll see you in the next one.